Welcome to A Seeking Heart with Allison Gingras, distributed through Breadbox Media. Easy for me to say. I am joined today by Julianne Stanz. We're going to talk about her new book, Braving the Thin Places. And I know there's a subtitle to it, Julie. Where is it? Right here. Celtic Wisdom to Create a Space for Grace. This is a very exciting conversation for me to have, not only because I'm a huge fan of Julianne's, but also I've been studying grace as I'm like a college course. I have been studying grace, and I was excited to get a little bit more educated by her new book, Braving the Thin Places, out now from Loyola Press. Julianne, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you so much, Allison, for having me, and thank you to all those who are listening in. It's good to be with you all.
I am so excited to share this book with the listeners. I loved your first book that I read. It's right here, With Jesus.
Start with Jesus? Yep.
Start with Jesus. What is wrong with my brain today? I'm so prepared.
It's because it's so cold.
It is. It was 4 degrees this morning when I put my daughter on the bus. A little chilly. So Start with Jesus, I loved. And it's something I recommend to everybody, especially women who are looking to bring other women together, small groups and things like that. But Braving the Thin Places, you were here last time talking about Start with Jesus. You kind of shared that this is something you had wanted to write for a long time. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Start with Jesus I wrote that kind of inspired to help people understand that their walk of discipleship could be deepened in the average everyday moments of their life. And so I poured that out in about 4 months, partly because I was also dodging publishing this one, which has been underway for literally 20 years. I used to keep a little pink notebook in my bag, and every time something came to me, I would make a little note of it. And my publisher came to me and said, I think it's time that you do something a little different. I know you've been working on this and you're very invested in your Celtic heritage, and there's some really interesting concepts that I think could help everyone, regardless of their ethnicity or heritage or background. And why don't you consider writing that? And I had moments during the writing process, because it was so personal to me, that I stopped and said, I can't do this. And thanks be to God, I had some good mentors in my life who said, just keep on going. And so this new book is the fruit of the guts of pain, tears, all of it poured out in one form.
And this is my first introduction to, I said Celtic, but I heard you just say Celtic. So I apologize.
No, that's okay.
Celtic, what's the word I'm looking for? Spirituality.
Wisdom.
Wisdom, spirituality. I didn't realize it was so rich and deep and beautiful. So tell us a little bit about, obviously you're from Ireland, so this is part of your heritage, but why the Celtic wisdom?
Yeah, I just want anybody who's listening in to know that this is such an accessible tradition with some practices that can really help you develop some spiritual resilience in your life and beautiful prayer forms. But I grew up in Ireland, and I grew up in a part of Ireland in the southeast or the east that's known as the ancient East. And so there are tombs, there are, what we call megalithic tombs that are, 3,500 years old and stretch back into the mists of time. And, St. Patrick, we know that there were vestiges of Christianity in Ireland, but St. Patrick really baptized the Irish for Christ. And so you have this beautiful marrying of some of these ancient practices that became Christianized, and some beautiful understandings of prayers like the Lorica or the breastplate prayer, prayers that can protect us and guide us. And so I was very lucky. I grew up kind of absorbing a lot of these. I didn't realize that they weren't, that they weren't well understood. And that was one of my passions, was to be able to bring this beautiful tradition to light in a way that helped people understand that there is no disunity with Christianity, that everything that I want to talk about harmonizes within our Catholic faith. Because unfortunately, I think there is a vein of the Celtic, it's wrapping around mythology and all of that doesn't quite harmonize with our tradition. And so I wanted to bring to light that real authentic tradition that developed in the early Christian church, particularly in the Celtic nations of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Nova Scotia, Brittany, and then a little place called the Isle of Man, which speaks a form of Gaelic called Manx. So really unusual. Yeah, kind of fun.
It's neat. It's I'm just overwhelmed by all of it. It was just some of the traditions, some of the just to completely go forward, the when your mother passed away, like that was fascinating to
Yeah.
me what your family did to make way for her to her eternal rest. Can you share just a little bit about that tradition? It was just so neat.
Yeah, so the early Christian church had some of the most beautiful practices around death and dying and entering life. And part of that was because the interplay between light and darkness for the Celts was something that they saw as a seamless transition. And so you have this beautiful understanding that between the, the darkness and the light, there's this twilight or this transition period, this thin place, or to use a very Irish expression, a betwixt and a between time, where one is giving way to the other. So a great example of that is, when you're expecting a baby, the child grows in the darkness of the womb. Like there is no light source in there. And so the child passes from the dark into the light of the world. And in death, we pass from what we think is the light back into the darkness. But it's really, those are all giving way to each other. So light and darkness are themes that are really important for us at home. And so my mother wanted, as she was passing, wanted to have a very traditional wake, which is the traditional days of mourning that are celebrated before the funerals, and little faith practices like we leave the window, a crack in the window open as somebody is passing into eternal life, to allow the souls of those who have passed on, which is a lovely understanding of the communion of saints, to come and visit the person who is dying so that they can ease their transition into the next life. So that's one of my favorite ones. Also, things like making sure that when the person passes on, that the body is treated with dignity and care. So there's shrouding, which is, you hear that Jesus was swaddled in a manger and then he was wrapped as he was taken down from the cross. So you have that beautiful understanding. And then one of my favorite traditions also is when the body is laid out, which is a very Irish term, to lay out the body. People come from all over the neighboring villages to sit with the body, to pray with the body, to share stories. And it really eases that passage of grief. And all around the body, it's typically the body is laid out in your living room. Which was very unusual for my husband seeing this for the first time. He was like, what is happening? And people go in to pay their respects, and sometimes they sing songs, but they tell stories. But all around the body are the candles. They're all lit. The body is never left untended to chase the darkness away. So all of those traditions are ones that we can adopt, we can remember, particularly around feast days like All Souls Day.
Well, I have a big devotion to the holy souls. I visit cemeteries in November, but also throughout the year. Whenever I drive by a cemetery, I always pray, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, I love you, save souls. Like, in fact, I'll be
Beautiful.
driving, and if you're with me in the car, if we're in mid conversation, if we're going by a cemetery, I just stop talking. I say it in my head, or I'll say it out loud the entire length of the cemetery, and then I'll just jump back into conversation. And the first time you're with me, you're like, okay, that was weird. I'm like, these souls are so precious to the Lord. Like,
Yeah,
to be able to pray for them, because you can no longer merit grace for yourself after you die, to be able to be part of that communion of saints, the communion of
absolutely.
souls, the cloud of witnesses. I just feel like that veil, that thin veil, is so thin, and learning that about my faith really opened up my heart to a whole new devotion, and it's just very near and dear to me. So reading that, the other thing I wanted to ask before we move on to the
Yeah.
next is, your sister stopped all the clocks.
Yeah, that's a big one because and actually another practice that goes along with stopping clocks when someone passes away is actually covering any reflective surfaces.
Right.
Yeah, the mirrors, and it's funny because I have studied so much of Celtic wisdom and traditions and practices. I was a history teacher, and so it's, for me, it's looking at the history and the theology and the devotional life all coming together. My sister, who doesn't have that kind of background, did these practices, and I remember saying to her, Janice, why are you shrouding the mirrors? Just to see if she'd remember. And she said, I don't know, it's just what we do here. And it's because the soul has to make its own passage. And so we want to avoid any reflectivity. And the clocks is particularly significant for us because if you have lost somebody significant in your life, and let's face it, we all have, time moves differently. And so we honor that the passage of time has been marked by that person's life. And so all the clocks in the house are stopped, to just remember that this is sacred time that we are now in, that temporal time or ordinary time has literally been suspended by death.
Oh my goodness. And I love that. I love that they're, devotions. They're not,
Mm-hmm.
they're not these things that we do that are superstitions,
Yeah.
but instead they're a part of a devotion. And I think that reading your book, again, we're talking today with Julianne Stanz, her new book, Braving the Thin Places, out from Loyola Press. I think your book showed me like this new idea of, or a deeper idea of tradition and devotion and not superstition. And it just gave it a way of kind of connecting. My new book is about sacramentals, so I've been spending a
Ooh.
lot of time looking at these beautiful devotions, and many people look at us like it's a superstition, like, oh, you
Mm-mm.
wear that cross around your neck, or you the holy water, all of those things, burning candles, incense, all of that, like it can be looked at, and to me it's just another way of connecting to my God, connecting to my faith. Well, so the name of the book is Braving the Thin Places. So what is a thin place?
And actually, you did a great job explaining a little earlier what a thin place is. It's these moments where God feels deeply present to us. And so heaven breaks through, the supernatural breaks through the extraordinary into the ordinary. And so thin places were always associated in Ireland with very specific historical places. So you would go to these places to commune or develop a greater sense of prayer and friendship with God. I grew up very, very close to Glendalough in County Wicklow, which is this ancient monastic site. And that site literally stretches, like I say, into the mists of time, because before it was Christianized, it was a holy site. It was a place where people would journey, where they struggled with fertility or relationship issues. And of course, when St. Patrick came to Ireland and lit that fire for Christianity, these places became even more important as centers of community life, and friendship and prayer. So initially, thin places was always associated with specific historic locations. But thin place spirituality really says to us, God can speak to us in these moments of our lives, and that certain times become watershed moments where we can feel in a very profound way how God is meeting us in the ordinary moments of our lives. Like, I'll give you an example of one. For me, was when I had my first child. And I remember, and your listeners are going to think, gosh, this is really interesting. But I remember going into the mirror in the bathroom in the hospital after I had my first child, because life felt so different to me.
Mm-hmm.
And there was such a discernible sense of sacredness. And I looked in the mirror to see, did I look different? Because I felt so different, because now my identity was now configured to motherhood. And
Yeah.
so that was a really important one. But if you've ever been in a room where someone has passed.
Oh, okay. Well, we lost Julianne for a minute there. We're going to just keep going until she joins back with us. We're talking today with Julianne Stanz, and her book is Braving the Thin Places. And she's back. See, I told you it wouldn't take her long to get back to us, and she'll be joining in a second. No, oh, no, we're having trouble keeping her. We're in a thin place right now. Maybe her internet. She and I talked for about 15 minutes before she came on. This happens in life sometimes. And okay, thank you. Welcome back. We went into a thin place. I don't know what happened.
I don't know what happened either. This is really strange. Anyway, I'm here, but that was
Yes.
very unusual.
Well, it's great that you were able to get back in. So we'll just continue. So you said you looked in the mirror because your life had just
Yep.
become kind of connected with motherhood, and you felt different. Did you look different? I mean, after birth, we do look a little different.
We do. I mean, I was definitely more raggedy and tired, but what was interesting to me is I felt like my eyes were softer. I had a greater understanding of what all women go through, the pain of birthing a child in the new life, and the joy on my husband's face. And so I feel like I looked different after that moment. And I think that's what thin places do for us. They kind of configure how we see ourselves and others, but more deeply God as well.
I love that your example was a joyful place, because for most of the book, as I was reading it, until I got deeper into it, and actually came into the book thinking this thin place would be a negative place, a difficult a challenging place, I guess is the better word for it. There would be these challenging moments in our lives. But I'm thrilled that you used a joyful, because that gives our listeners just a little bit more understanding that it's all those places, like any of those places that I think you write that allows God to enter in. And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of grace. Grace, as I said, I've been studying it, and I had no idea how wide and depth. I mean, we're talking about the unfathomable God and his
Mm.
gift of himself to us, because that's what grace is, the undeserved, freely given gift of God's Holy Spirit within us, in all of the places he can make himself known. So did you find, spending more time looking at the thin places, did it bring you a deeper, because sometimes I think we forget that the writer also experiences the book as it's being created. Did you find it deepened your own spirituality?
Oh, for sure. It helped me become more reflective of the hand of God and how He was writing parts of my story when I didn't even realize that there was a pen on the table. And, I think back to those moments of my life, like real high points of joy and real high points of pain and suffering, and how God was meeting me in those moments. And I think that's what grace, when we look and we lean into grace, we realize that we only see, in our humanness, a fraction of God's goodness and his majesty and his glory in our lives.
Yeah.
And so when I think about, those times of grace for me, I feel like he broke through, because thin places always encourage you to break through. And I actually, this is a funny little story, but actually around chapter 8 or 9, I decided I was not going to finish the book, that it was too hard for me. And I sent it to a friend of mine who I really trust and said, he's written 20 books. It's stupid, isn't it? Yeah, like this isn't good. And he wrote back, "What are you thinking?" And I realized, we all have those voices that can deter us, and God gives grace when we least expect it. And so for me, the grace to continue going and to persevere was the opportunity for Him to love me even more through this experience. So it was a neat time.
That is, it's funny you're saying that, because when I sent in my draft manuscript to Ave Maria Press, I was absolutely convinced that they were going to send me back my contract ripped up. Like, what were we thinking? We've made a huge mistake. And it's those voices, right? It's, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, obviously the evil one doesn't want us to spread the
Absolutely.
good news of Jesus Christ anywhere. And so he kind of uses our own brokenness, the voices perhaps from our childhood, the mistakes that we make, the failures, and just kind of pushes those little buttons, and you can be just kind of, I think, derailed. But I'm glad that you found somebody. I love this part, this actually breaking free part, where you talk about a soul friend. I've never heard of this expression before, Julianne, ever. What is a soul friend?
So, in the early Christian church, people lived in monastic communities, very, very closely together. And when you live in any community, whether it's a family or you've lived in a college dorm, let's say, there's times when community life can really be very trying. And so this beautiful understanding of what we call the anam cara, which is the Gaelic word for soul friend, is someone that holds up a mirror to your life and to your heart and to your soul, and really encourages you to grow closer to God. And unfortunately, this soulmate idea has become kind of co-opted in the secular modern life to be this like romantic kind of thing. But for 14, 1500 years, this was a beautiful understanding of someone who would mirror back to you God's grace, but also the movement of God in your life. And so St. Bridget of Ireland, for example, there's a lovely story where she's in the refectory, which is kind of like a monastic cafeteria. And a young man comes in, and St. Bridget says to him, "I can see that half thy portion is lost." And it's a very peculiar turn of phrase. Basically, she said, like, you're only half there. And the young man said, "How do you know?" And he said, "Because I can see that your soul friend has passed on to eternal life." And it's this,
Wow.
yeah. So you've got these great ancient, 5th and 6th century texts, and they talk about this development of the soul friend. And I think about spiritual direction and spiritual companioning, but I also think about brotherhood and sisterhood. When you meet somebody that you can have a connection with at the deepest level of soul, it's almost like it's an act of ancient recognition where your soul and their soul kind of meet each other ahead of even your own intellect or consciousness, and you just click. That's a great example of having a soul connection with someone.
Oh my gosh, that is such a beautiful tradition and just a beautiful heritage. I'm so excited that you're sharing this with all of us. And Braving the Thin Places, Julianne Stanz, Loyola Press. The last kind of concept I want to jump into before we run out of time together is that you have an acronym for GRACE. Again, I've been studying GRACE. My little antenna went up, and I'm just going to give the words that you kind of associated with grace, and then I'd love for you just to give us a little bit more. So gratitude, G, gratitude, R, rest or reset, A, acceptance, C, cultivating hospitality, not exactly my strongest suit, E, embracing stillness. So tell me a little bit about this acronym and maybe some of those words and why you've offered this for us for contemplation.
Yeah, one of the great gifts of the early Christian church was their understanding of the cycle of life, the circular dimension, the alpha and the omega. There is no beginning and no end to the love of God. And so in early Christian art, you'll see a lot of the spiraling. If you look at the Irish sweaters, jewelry, they have a lot of those triple spirals, the Trinitarian spiral. And so they're an important part of Celtic life. And one of the ways that I wanted to draw the book kind of from the beginning back to the end and to the beginning again was to really look at that concept of God's grace as having no beginning and end through some practices. And so I identify 5 practices that can really help people develop spiritual resilience, a greater sense of peace and joy in their life, the ability to weather storms and understand how God is moving. Like, we don't always fully understand that. We can have knowledge of it, but to really lean into God's grace in this circle. And so the first one is gratitude. And it's not like just having that attitude of gratitude, but recognizing God's abundance and his generosity. I think sometimes as Christians, we live out of a scarcity mindset. You know, mass attendance is down. There's not enough resources to go around. But the gospel is nimble, portable, shareable, adaptable. It walks its way out into our lives in so many ways. And so it's gratitude par excellence. It's that gratitude for the person of Jesus Christ, the goodness of God the Father, and the love of the Holy Spirit. So that's that one. And then I really talk about this opportunity to embrace rest, and that wraps really into that piece on stillness as well. There's a difference between silence and stillness, and I think sometimes we use them interchangeably. One of the great gifts that the Celts gave the church was this understanding of poverty of spirit and heart and cultivating silence. And so you can be in a room, and I will tell you, because my mind is constantly racing. You can be in a room with people and you can have deep interior peace, or you can be in a room where there is absolutely nothing spoken and your mind can be distracted. And the first step of being a good listener and listening for God is to tune in. It's attunement. And that means consciously noting the thoughts that are racing through your head and your heart and really saying, I'm switching off. I need to be still and present to God. And there's this lovely Celtic proverb, he, she, and thee, all things in three. So like in our conversation today, you and I are here, but your listeners are listening in. But really in our conversation, God is deepest within this conversation. And so in every interaction that we have to listen for that. And then one that's very important in the Irish culture, you know, you've heard of like Céad Míle Fáilte, which means 100,000 welcomes, is this understanding of hospitality. I think, when we talk about Christian hospitality, I think sometimes we talk about like donut rolls and donuts and but really this is about, it's deeper than that. There's, this 5th century prayer that says, O King of Stars, referring to Jesus, whether my house be dark or bright, may it be not closed against anybody. May Christ not close his house against me. So basically saying that we receive others in the manner in which we expect to be received by Christ. And so true Christian hospitality actually flows from the virtue of charity and receiving the other as Christ and welcoming the stranger. There's a lovely scripture about we entertain angels unawares. But I think that's where our Irish Christian hospitality extended from, which was always from the virtue of practicing charity. And then, so I want to share with your listeners a lovely Irish word called mehel. And it's this understanding of gathering and community. And mehel is this antidote to this sterile individualism, I think, that the culture pushes on us to say, let's come together, let's look at what unites us rather than divides us. And Mehel is this understanding of the fact that we're all interconnected, instead of we're radically independent. So some beautiful practices that we can really lean into.
I love that you used the expression lean into grace. It's actually one of the things that I
Ooh.
have been contemplating when I sit with this, literally sit with the book, a couple of these resources that my spiritual director has given me. And his advice was to study grace like it's a college course. And I hadn't
Wow.
really thought about studying faith like it's a college course. And, to me, that meant reading it, underlining it, making notes, rereading it, which is not something I do often with spiritual reading. I don't always go back and reread what I've underlined, taking notes in a separate notebook, finding additional resources, and just really diving in and
Mm-hmm.
getting to know the unfathomable God just a little
A
bit
little bit
better.
more. Yeah.
It is and there's moments for that. And it happened when I was reading your book too, where you have these moments of clarity that you can't put to words. There's just no way of explaining them, but God just showed up. The Holy
Amen.
Spirit just made you this much closer to him that you were a second before that. And you can't explain it, and it's overwhelming, and the joy could be even fleeting, but yet so powerful. You're like, there is a God, and I just met him right this moment, even again, if it was just fleeting.
That's
I
beautiful. That is just beautiful.
Well, it was inspired by your beautiful writing.
Oh, thank you.
Uh, and I do love, and just again, one last thing is that I love when a book gives me a call to action, because it's not just about being educated or growing in knowledge, but to take that and bring it forth. It's discipleship, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
you're taught, and then it's not just for you, it's to bring to others and to share. And sometimes we even, to be able to discern it deeper, it requires some action. So I love that at the end of each chapter you have breaking open, breaking through, and breaking free. Can you just quickly share a little bit about what that looks like at the end of each chapter?
Yeah, I recognized when I was writing this that some of the concepts are so deep. A lot of people were saying to me, like, I could meditate on this one line forever. And so I wanted to make it accessible, because I don't want to see this wisdom that I grew up with and that became second nature to me as difficult or inaccessible to people. And
Right.
so there's a summary section that really encourages you to apply some of the deepest points of the wisdom from the Celtic tradition in a specific context in your life. And so every there is rooted in what's called a shanukkel, which is a wise word. And like one of my favorite shanukkels is Askaha Akela Awaranadini, which is we live in the shadow of one another. Now, that doesn't mean like we're overshadowed by one another, but if you think about facing the sunlight, your body casts a shadow, which can be a place of respite and healing and grace for someone else. And so I wanted to tease out some of those themes in a way that would help, moms, dads, friends, grandparents kind of connect to this tradition in a really practical way.
And that is so beautiful. And I loved every one of your Irish old words. I'm not even going to try to say that beautiful Celtic word there, Gaelic word, because that's not at all how I saw it in my head. Apparently, I need to get out more. That is just, I love that really, each one of them, you could, as you just said, your friends said, I could get lost in that. I could get lost in that forever. In this chapter, every beginning is weak. Like,
Mm-hmm.
love that. That was just
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. And I could
Yeah.
probably listen to you use these words in your beautiful native tongue forever. But unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time together. Julianne, how can people find the book? Obviously, we want to make sure they can find it and learn more about it. And also, how can they follow you and your beautiful writing?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the opportunity to just be here and share a little bit of my heart. I would really encourage people, especially at this time in the life of our world and our church, and knowing that so many our communities are been built by small business owners, to really go to your small local bookstores and ask for a copy of the book. It's published by Loyola Press. You can find it at all major bookstores online, at the big retailers, but also you can go to loyolapress.com and there's a link on there that you can order it, or you can go through my website, juliannestanz.com, and I'll let you know to my friend. I'll pass you on a special discount just for your listeners in. I had asked my publisher if I could have something special just for family and friends, and so they put together a special little discount for your listeners. So I'll make sure you get that too.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. And we'll make sure to share that in the show notes. And I'm so glad you mentioned local bookstores. We talk about that at the end of every show. And just to remind people that if they go to their local bookstore and they don't see it, they can ask it to be ordered.
Yeah.
And that is not just a beautiful way for them to get the book, but that also lets this business owner know that there's something out there that people are looking for, and it actually helps their business as well. So I love that you mentioned supporting the small businesses, and I love that you made time for us this morning. This has been just another delightful time with Julianne Stanz. Thank you, Julianne.
Thank you. I just want to say Gurv Mila Mahagut, which is 1,000 thank yous. Of course, the Irish are known to a little bit of blarney, so I couldn't help but sneak that in. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad that you did. That made my day. You have been listening to A Seeking Heart with Allison Gingras, distributed through Breadbox Media. God bless.